My name is Kivanc Yazan. I am a software engineer, and I like to contribute to open source projects with little patches every now and then. So today I'm here to share my experience and give you an introduction to the world of open source. I want to start with a show of hands, actually. Feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to don't raise your hand if you don't want to. That's perfectly fine. But how many of you know what Git is? That's great. How many of you know what a pull request is? How many of you have submitted a pull request before? Okay, so that's great. Almost everyone knows what Git and pull request is, and maybe half of the audience have submitted a pull request before. The reason I'm asking is I try to prepare this talk as beginner-friendly as possible. So I'm hoping that if you don't know what Git is, or if you don't know what a pull request is, you'll be able to walk out by knowing about it a little. And if you already know what those are, that's still great. I hope you find this talk as a refresher, and maybe you'll find something you didn't know as well. So the slides are already available online at the address. Let's actually start by showing my first pull request, because my title was my first pull request, so that only makes sense. This was, to give a little bit of background, I was still a student at the time. I had no professional experience as a developer, so I had pretty much no confidence in contributing to an open source project. I was thinking, like, who am I to, write code for a big application? And one day I realized one of the applications I was using was actually open sourced on GitHub. And while looking at the code base, not understanding anything that's happening, I realized the project was accepting translations. And my native tongue is Turkish, and the Turkish translation wasn't there. So I figured, well, this is a great chance for me to give this a try. And what I did was I just copied one of the translations. There were only a few strings anyway. I translated those into Turkish, submitted, and it got merged, thankfully. So that was a great experience for me. After that pull request was merged, I felt like a happiness that came out of nowhere, because this application now has something that I put in there. And you could download the latest app. You could see the Turkish translation live. That was a great feeling. And I even got a comment back from the maintainer saying thank you. And I think that's the magical part about contributing, thanking other people for their random contributions. So there are various reasons why you would want to contribute to an open source project. And that recognition is just one of them. If you just like the feeling when you help other people, that's perfectly fine. If you just want to give back, that's perfectly fine. If you want to be recognized for your efforts, that's fine as well. But my point here is there are various reasons, and you can pick whatever you want. You can contribute to open source projects just to build your portfolio because you can't showcase your code at work. That's fine. You're doing it for reputation, that's also fine. Open source projects usually are a safe space for making mistakes. So if you make a mistake, people help you figure out what's wrong, what went wrong, with not a lot of consequences. So if you're using that open source as a space for making mistakes and learning from your mistakes, that's also fine. If you're doing it for money, that's also fine. And for example, if you're a student, have no idea about what's the latest business practices, you can find some open source projects that are following those latest tech and learn about that as well. But most of all, helping each other is a really great feeling. A burden shared is a burden halved. So here I'm going to tell a little story here about myself. I used to run regularly. And by the way, if anyone's running LA Marathon tomorrow, good luck to you. Don't forget the daylight saving thing, which apparently happens tonight. I used to run regularly, and I used to train by myself, and it got boring, so I figured I should invite some of my friends, but none of them would come run with me because they never run before. So I had to find a way to bring them to the field. I figured I had all these running shirts that are given by various marathons just sitting around, so I figured I could bribe them by offering them a free t-shirt and ask them to come run with me once. And what happened was I gave a lot of t-shirts and I gained a few running buddies. In the picture you're seeing my brother. We were running together, and I was happy to convince him to give this a try, and he really liked it, and he kept doing it by himself. So I'm doing the same thing here today. I tried it, I really liked it, I kept doing it, and I'm encouraging you to give this a try as well, and maybe do your first pull request, and maybe you'll like it, and you'll keep doing it. I don't have free t-shirts though, sorry about that. The structure of the talk will be, I will talk a little bit about basics of open source, free software, and things I learned that were not immediately obvious. I'm going to talk a little about licenses and the legal aspects, only so much that you should know before contributing. I'm not going to go into too much detail. And then I'll switch to source control. Specifically, I will talk about Git. I will start building an example while talking about Git. And then I'll switch to pull requests. I will build on the example and explain how it would look. And then we will demo the example that we built. And I will close with a few pointers for you if you want to give this a try. So kind of like find my first project. Before going further, I want to give you this disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, because we'll talk about licenses. We'll talk about some legal aspects. If you need professional help, get your help from a professional, not from me. Open source, I have a bunch of words here that I'm going to talk about. Open source, free software, I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know there were two different things. Open source and free software were in my mind always referring to the same thing. But apparently they are not actually the same thing. They're referring to slightly different things. Open source is usually identified, is usually referred to by open source initiative, and free software usually by Free Software Foundation. And there are slight differences between free software and open source. I think the biggest one is free software folks tend to focus more on the freedom aspect of the software. So they're trying to make sure that once a software is free, once a software has the liberty, it stays that way forever. And open source is a little more permissive in that aspect. There are, I think, a practical difference in terms of licenses they use, etc. But in my opinion, they're all going to the same place, only with different roads. So you may as well see those two terms used interchangeably. You can also see those two terms combined. So you can see FOSS, FLOSS, free open source software, and free libre open source software, just to clarify that it's not free as in no money needed. The thing I learned here is if you are going to contribute to a project that calls themselves a free software project, just call it a free software project. So whatever they're calling it, the advice I can give, call it that way. We talked a little about licenses. So Open Source Initiative and Free Software Foundation, they both have their own set of kind of rules. So Free Software Foundation has a list of 4 freedoms they list, and Open Source Initiative has 10 goals of a software, all available online. And so they both have a set of licenses that they approve. If you go to Wikipedia and search for a comparison of open source licenses, you will see a list of licenses on rows, and on columns you will see whether this is approved by Free Software Foundation, whether this is approved by Open Source Initiative, whether this is approved by Debian or Fedora. So you will see picking a license is very important if you want to identify your project as an open source project. If you, for example, pick a license that is not approved by Open Source Initiative, they don't want you to call that project an open source project. Kind of like a legal thing, but very basics, things that you should know. Just because you make your code available online, for example, you upload your code to GitHub, doesn't mean you don't have the copyright to the code. And in fact, you have the copyright, and by adding a license file to your code base, you're saying, I'm letting you use my code under these terms. So if you don't put a license, people don't know what the terms are, and that means your project is source available, which means its source is there, and you don't know what you can do with it. In fact, there are some licenses that lets you only see the code. So I think that's a separate thing, but I'm here explaining the case where you don't have a license at all. In free software, I already mentioned this, doesn't refer to no money. It refers to liberty. And so free software doesn't mean the software you can get by not paying money. In fact, you can sell free software for money. You can sell open source software for money. But the question is, why would you pay for something that you can get for free? And there are various reasons. You can pay money to get extra support. You can pay money for convenience. You can pay money for donation. And there are some companies. Now, another thing, I used to think that companies would hate open source and it's like an ongoing battle, but I found out that's no longer a hard truth. There are some companies who release some of their projects to world of open source so other people can use it. There are some companies who help open source projects out by sponsoring them. There are companies who use those open source projects and in turn give back resources to them, including money or people time. So there are some companies that are built on top of open source projects, and they can make money as well. So free software doesn't mean you can't sell it. Going back to licenses, I've also found out there are basically 2 groups of licenses. Of course, an oversimplification, but those groups are Copyleft licenses and permissive licenses. Copyleft licenses usually associated with free software, and permissive licenses usually with open source, not true 100% of time, but usually. And Copyleft license is there to make sure the software stays free going forward. So it has this additional thing that if you take a project with Copyleft license, if you modify it, you can redistribute it under certain terms. So you don't get to choose, for example, you don't get to change the license. You get to change the license, but you can't change the license to a more restricted one. So for example, if you have an open source project licensed with a permissive license, you can modify it, build your own copy, and then just sell it without distributing the source code because you choose to. Again, talk to a professional before doing so. It's not legal advice. But some examples are Copyleft licenses. The most popular one, I think, is GNU General Public License v3, and Permissive has MIT and Apache 2.0 are very common. Okay. Here on, I'm going to switch topics. This was all the basics that I wanted to give about open source world. I'm going to change to source control, and specifically I'm going to talk about Git. This is an application that lets you build a software. You can use it for other purposes as well, but in this case, it's for software where you can track your changes and refer to the history of the software. There are other applications that achieve the same goal, like Apache Subversion, also known as SVN. I think it's still maintained. And another one is Concurrent Version System, CVS. I think it's no longer maintained, but still used by some. So we're going to talk about Git. If you want to talk about Git, I figured these are the words that I should give. These are the words I should explain before going further. Repository, commit, and branch specifically. A repository is just a project. So what happens is, for example, you go to an online Git host like github.com. You create a new project, and you get an empty code repository. You can do the same on your local machine as well. If you open up a terminal and start initialize an empty Git repository, that's your repository there. The way it tracks the changes is via commits. Commits are like checkpoints in your code repository that you can refer back in future. So building on the empty repository example, assume you want to add 2 files to your repository. You put your 2 files there, and then you build a checkpoint of those 2 files, and that's your initial commit. For example, in the future, if you change one of those files, you can still refer back to your old checkpoint and see how that file originally was. You can keep adding commits and build your tree, and that's where branches come in. By default, there's only one branch, and it's called master. So you can just keep adding to your default branch and build your tree. But if you're working with multiple people, or if you're working with on multiple features at the same time, it's usually a good idea to make use of branches. And that's just where you add a branch to your tree, and then maybe merge it back into your master branch in the future. More on that later. Git works as a distributed application. So if you have 10 developers working on your project, you can have 10 of them have a copy, have a clone of your code repository in their local machines. You can have a remote optionally. This could be a remote that you are hosting yourself. It could be a remote that is hosted by GitHub or GitLab. So in the example of 10 developers having a local copies of the same repository, for example, if you are using GitHub, they could push and pull the most up-to-date state of the repository to GitHub. This is optional, meaning you don't really need an internet connection or network, anything for using Git. You can just start a Git repository from your local computer. And if you don't want to push it to a remote, you just don't push it to a remote. Okay, here's some examples on how that would work. I'm going to show commits with little circles, and I'm going to call this commit A. So this is, imagine I have an empty repository with an initial commit named A. Also imagine this is a remote. So for example, for sake of simplicity, this is a repository I started on github.com. It has one commit named A, and then one branch named master. So branches work just as labels. A branch is just a pointer to a commit. It says my master branch is pointing to this commit. And that means the head of the branch is that commit. So there's no magic in branches really. The next thing you could do is if you started your repository on github.com, for example, you can clone this repository back into your local machine by running git clone, and that would bring exactly the same copy of the repository to your local machine. Now, just to clarify, you can do it the other way around as well. So you can start your repository in your local computer and then push it back to GitHub. That works too. Or don't push it, just stay in your local. That's also possible. So assume you added one more commit, commit B, to your remote repository, and now your master is pointing to the latest commit. So github.com has the updated version, but your local is out of date. How do you fix this? Is you run git pull to pull the latest changes from remote to your local. It works the other way as well. So if your local is ahead, you can push your changes back to remote, and now they're even. So we talked about branches as well. So let's just to give it a quick example of the branch. You can use one of these commands, checkout, or in newer versions of Git, switch works too. As soon as you do that, for example, I have here a feature branch now that is pointing to the exactly same comment because I haven't added there anything yet. I just checked out a new branch, so I'm pointing to the same place. Later, for example, if you add a commit to your feature branch, what happens is your feature branch moves a little ahead. And maybe later you merge it back to master. It's up to you. This image I found on Wikipedia was really helpful in summarizing what Git can do, but it has too many things for the purposes of this presentation, so I simplified it a little bit to explain what I've just talked about. We have the remote on the left and the local on the right. So we talked about pulling changes from remote to your local. We talked about pushing. But one thing to think about here is what are you pushing? So if you make a change in your working directory, if you update 2 files and you run git push, you can't expect Git to magically find out what you want to push. There's a certain process. You have to create a checkpoint. You have to create a commit in a branch, and then you can push that branch back to remote. There is this extra step called stage. And it works like this. So for example, in your working directory, you have checked out a repository, you have checked out a branch. You have changed 2 files, but you only want to commit 1. The stage area helps you in this. So you only stage the changes you want to commit. So you stage the one file that you wanted to commit, and then as soon as you run the commit, it just takes the stage and makes a checkpoint. Some other commands that I frequently use, git status is super, super helpful in figuring out what you have in your working files, what you have in your stage, and what it also helps you to, it also points you to the next command you should be running. Git log lists you the list of commits you had. So for example, if I had the feature branch checked and if I run git log, it was going to print me a DCBA. If I checked out master branch, it was going to print me CBA. Diff is also a useful command. So if I make some changes in my working files, and if I run git diff, it's going to show me the difference. It's going to show me the work in progress. There is a diff -- stage as well, and that's very useful to see what's in stage. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about build on this example and talk a little about pull requests. Like I said, a pull request it's just a patch. It's a commit that you offer to someone else. The fact is, we talked about pushing your changes to your remote. But if you don't have permissions to push, if it's someone else's repository, you can't direct the push. So in that case, the strategy to follow is building a patch and sending that patch as an offer. Like, would you like to merge this patch into the repository? It's called pull request. It's called merge request. And it can, GitHub and GitLab and other services have a specific UI to make this easier. Some of the projects are still accepting patches through emails, which effectively does the same thing. So, for example, the time zone database that I'm sure all of the devices in the room is using, they have a GitHub repository, but they don't accept pull requests on GitHub. They accept patches through emails. So that's another thing I should have probably mentioned earlier. You should follow the project's convention. If they accept patches through emails, just read the documentation they have and follow that. The pull requests and patches usually comes with a discussion, so you get a chance to talk to the maintainers. So as a contributor, you send a patch, and maybe they will have some comments for you, they will have some feedback for you, and you will have something to say. So on the demo I'm going to do, I will use GitHub, and it'll be a little more clear, but it'll be a chance to discuss the changes. The first example I showed, my actual first pull request was a translation. And this is to say that pull request doesn't have to be a code. It doesn't have to be a new feature. It can be a bug fix. It can be a documentation improvement. It can be a fixing and documentation that went out of date. It can be documenting a feature that was not documented, but there. It can be translating, fixing a test, adding a test, removing a test that was not working. It can be adding a design, a logo, anything. So pull requests are not specific to codes. That's what I'm trying to say. And pull requests, even though the talk is about pull requests, I think I have to mention this. Pull requests are not the only way to contribute to an open source project. So the bigger open source projects get, the more help they need, I think. And they can use your help in, for example, triaging incoming bug reports. So maybe they have like 10 bug reports that come in every day. Maybe they need someone's help to figure out whether they were already reported or not. And that's not a pull request, but that's still help. So I'm trying to say, while pull requests are important, that's not the only way to contribute. And don't feel like you're not contributing if you're not submitting a pull request. Even like verifying an issue and saying like, oh, this was fixed, we can close this issue, that's a great help. So here's an example. I'm going to use two names. One is owner, to represent the owner of the repository, and one is contributor, representing the person who is trying to send a patch in. So here I have owner's repository named nameprint. It's a simple code that just prints your first name. It doesn't do too much. We're looking at the master branch of the owner's repository. And the patch contributor wants to send is, instead of printing first names, let's print full names for whatever reason. And what happens is, contributor, this is called fork. Contributor copies the repository under their own namespace so they can control it. We're still looking at the master branch. While you can do this on your master branch, well, you can make your changes on your master branch. Since we talked about feature branches, let's go ahead and check a new branch called a feature branch. This is still under contributor's namespace. And make the change, make the program so that it prints full names instead of first names. And the next step is sending the actual pull request. We are going to talk to owner and say, hey, do you want to merge my feature branch into your master branch? And send that pull request. Please merge my changes. And if it gets accepted, the owner's repository is updated with my comment. To show it in a slightly more low level, let's assume owner's repository looks like this. It has two commits named initial commit, and a second commit named add print.py. And the master branch is pointing to this second commit. What I did first was I first forked the repository. So I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to fork this repository into my own account. So now I have a copy of exactly the same repository. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to clone this repository that now belongs, that is now my under namespace, into my local machine. So I'm cloning this repository. So I have 3 copies. Right now we have 3 copies that are even, and you can see 2 of them, for sake of this example, are on GitHub, and this is on my local machine. And as a contributor, I only have access to these 2. I don't have direct permissions on owner's repository. So the next thing I did was create a feature branch before doing my work. So I go that, let's check out a new feature branch. Like I said, it's just a label, right now pointing to the same commit. Do the actual work, add the commit to the feature branch, so now my feature branch has this extra commit named use full name. This is perfect, this is done. But my remote has no idea that this change has happened. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to push my local feature branch to my remote so that it shows up on GitHub as well. So there you go. And the next step is asking for the pull request. And specifically, I'm asking for my feature branch to be merged into their master branch. And when they do, the final original project is now printing full names instead of first names. So the demo is going to be this. I'm going to do exactly what I explained here. I'm going to start with owner creating a repository on GitHub. So first thing I'm going to show you here, is it readable from the back? Yeah. So first thing I'm going to show you here is I have created 2 GitHub accounts, conveniently named owner, and in an incognito window, contributor. So I have 2 logins. First, I'm going to click this plus button here and create a new repository named nameprint. A quick description, a quick script to print names. I'm going to let it stay public so that someone else can see it and contribute as well. I'm going to pick this, initialize this repository with a README file. A README file is just going to be a nice file that says repository name and description. And one thing that is nice is it lets me pick a license from the very beginning. So if you click add a license, it brings you a list of licenses. And the licenses I talked about, the ones are in bold, I think, are the most popular ones. So we talked about Copyleft licenses, GNU General Public License v3.0. Other licenses that are more permissive, MIT license and Apache license 2.0. Here I'm going to use MIT license just because. I click create repository. And that's it. So right now I have a repository under owner namespace named nameprint. It has 1 branch, and the branch is named master. It has 1 commit and 2 files. So it has the license file and it has the README file, and the README file is also displayed here. So if you go to this commit history, you see I only have single commit that's named initial commit. So I did this, except I don't have the second commit yet. And just for sake of demo, I'm going to add that second commit from my local machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to code here. There is a green button that stands out that says clone or download. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to clone this repository into my local machine. Usually you should use SSH for authentication, but for sake of making this demo simpler, I'm going to use HTTPS. Let's go back to terminal. Okay, so I have this terminal that is ready for the demo. I have two directories here, one named owner and one named contributor. The reason I did that was when I'm wearing my owner hat, I'm going to be in owner directory, so it's a little easier to follow. Right now, the owner directory has nothing in it. What I wanted to do was I wanted to clone this repository. So I copy this link, I type git clone, and the paste. See, the link has owner's namespace, so I'm cloning it from there. Enter. So it's cloned. Let's do a list again. There's the directory. So I'm going to cd change my directory into this. So right now I'm in the name print. If you do a list, use the same two files, license and readme. So they're there. And in case you're wondering where the git magic is happening, if you do a ls all, you're going to see an extra directory named .git, and that's where the git keeps its magic. And I don't recommend going in there. So let's try some of the comments we talked about. Let's see what git status prints. It says you're on branch master. Your branch is up to date with origin master. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. We're on branch master, and our master is up to date with the remote master. So if you do a git log, you're going to see only one commit that is coming from owner. Now I'm going to do one trick here that you don't have to do. It's a script that runs these two comments. So I run these two so that my commits I'm going to add right now are identified as owner. So next that we're going to do is we're going to add this print.py file. So let me bring that print file to where I am right now. Let's do a list and see print.py is there. Let's look inside what's there. It's a very quick Python script that reads your full name, asks for your full name, and reads it from the standard input, and then tries to split it by spaces, and then tries to get the first thing in that list, and then prints the first name. So let's actually give that a try, see if that works. Python 3 print.py. It asks me what's my full name, and if I print my full name, it's welcoming me with my first name. So that seems to work. Okay. Now, what's the next step? Let's do a git status and see what's happening. It's telling me you're still on branch master, your branch is up to date, but now you have some untracked files. It's print.py. Untracked files, and use git add to include in what will be committed. So this is basically saying me, I have some changes that are not in stage yet. So if you want these to be committed, you should move those to stage by running git add. So I'm going to do that, git add print.py. And now let's do a git status again. Okay, it's a little different now. It says changes to be committed. This is a new file. And if you want to unstage this file, you should do this. Instead, I'm going to commit this change by running git commit and add a message with -m add print.py. Okay, so it created a new commit now. Let's look at git log again. And now you can see I have two commits. Initial commit is still here, and then add print.py is added by Kivanc owner as well. So the next step is let's run git status again, see what's happening. That's why I said git status is really helpful. It's basically telling you what's happening with your repository. Now it's telling me you're on branch master, but your branch is ahead of origin master by one commit. Use git push to public your local commit. So what this is saying is now you have two commits, but your GitHub it still has one commit. So you should do a git push. And when I'm running git push, it's going to ask for username and password only because I cloned the repository with HTTPS. So it's trying to identify me with my password. Normally you should use SSH and don't input your password every time. Hunter 2. So it made it there. Looks like it made there to master. Let's do a git status. It says, okay, I'm up to date with origin master. Let's refresh this. Okay, now print.py has made here, and I have 2 commits. So it looks like it worked fine. Let's click into 2 commits, add print.py. Yeah, it made it here. So I'm here right now. And the next step I'm going to do, I'm going to take off my owner hat and put on my contributor hat and fork this owner's repository into my own account. So I'm pretty much done with owner for now. I'm going to move out of owner's directory and move into contributor directory. So I'm a different person now. Here I'm logged in as a contributor. I signed in as Kivanc contributor. And somehow I'm magically going to find this repository that I came across on GitHub that belongs to someone else named owner. So I don't have, even if I clone this, I don't have permissions to push here. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to click this fork button right here. It's going to take a second. But when it ends, it's going to give me the same repository under my namespace now. So contributor / nameprint, forked from owner / nameprint. Exactly the same. 2 commits, 1 branch that is master, and it's even telling me this branch is even with owner's master. So that's good. Next, I'm going to. Right now we are here. The next step, I'm going to clone this fork into my computer. So I'm going to click this clone here, get the link, and now I'm in contributor directory. There's nothing here yet, so I'm going to clone. And this time the URL has contributor's URL. Previously it was Kivanc/owner, now it's Kivanc/contributor. Let's do this. Okay. So let's do a ls. The directory is here. I'm going to cd into this directory. Let's do another ls. I have all 3 files that I was hoping to have. And if I do a git log, I'm going to see those 2 commits, add print.py and initial comment. So we are, where are we right now? We're at this state. We have exactly the same copy of the repository in 3 places. And most importantly, I have the local copy. The next step, I will check out a feature branch. And to do so, I run git checkout -b for the branch, for new branch, I think. And I'm going to name this branch full name. So as soon as I do that, it switches to a new branch full name. If I do a git status, it's going to tell me on branch full name, nothing to commit, working tree clean. Now, previously, when I was on master branch, let's check out master branch back and do a git status. It was telling me your branch is up to date with origin master. But now, if I do a git status on my full name branch, it's not telling me anything about being up to date. And that's because at this state, I don't have a feature branch here. My remote has no idea about this branch. So nothing is tracking that. Let's go back to feature branch named full name. And here, I'm going to modify this print.py file. I'm going to get rid of these 2 lines. And instead of writing first name, I'm going to print full name. So the new script is just read full name from the input and print it back. So save and quit. Let's do a git status. You have modified this file. but you haven't staged your changes. Before staging my changes, I want to make sure this works as expected. So Python 3 print.py. What's your full name? Let's give it a try. Welcome full name. So that works fine. Now we can add our change. Git add. Let's do a git status again to see where we are. You run branch full name, and these are the changes to be committed. So let's commit that change. Git commit -m for message. Use full name. Now it created a commit in this branch named full name. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that it can display all 3 commits. I'm going to run git log, and you will see I still have the initial commit. I still have the print.py by owner. I forgot to change my name, but you will see use full name is coming from someone else. Here, the state is this. I have the feature branch with 3 commits and the master branch with 2 commits. So if I check out the master branch back and do a git log, it's going to show me 2 commits. If I check out the full name branch and do a git log, it's going to show me 3 commits. So this is the state I'm in. The next step is I'm going to push my local feature branch to my remote that had no idea that I even had the branch. And let's see what happens when I try a git push. It gives me a photo error saying there's nothing tracking this branch named full name. So it's telling me I should run this command instead. So git push and set upstream full name. Origin here is the name of the remote. Git push that set dash upstream origin full name. This time I'm logging into contributor. And looks like it worked. So it says to contributor /nameprint, new branch, full name. Let's go back to the incognito window and see if it worked. So even without the refresh, it's telling me you recently pushed branches, full name, less than a minute ago. So if I refresh, it's going to show me 2 branches here. And right now I'm in master branch, and it has 2 comments in it. So if I switch to full name here, it's going to show me 3 commits. And if I go in, it has 2 commits from the owner and 1 commit from the contributor. So let's go back. Right now we're at this state, and the next step is submitting the actual pull request. And that's I'm going to do through the UI. There are, as far as I could see, there are 3 buttons that would do the same thing. So your recently pushed branches has this compare and pull request button. There's a new pull request button here, and another one right here. So any of those work. I'm just going to click this. And it shows me the UI that says open a pull request. The important thing here is confirming what you're requesting. So I'm requesting contributor's full name branch to be merged into owner's master branch and use full name. And when you're submitting a pull request, unlike my first pull request, you should always leave a comment. You should always say something nice. So hi, thanks for maintaining this nice project. This is the PR. Hope you find it helpful. Here's my reasoning. Blah, blah, blah. So once you click that pull request button, it's out there. And that's all I have with contributor. So I switch back to owner's login. So now I have here, I am signed in as Kivanc owner. If I refresh my repository, I'm going to see pull requests 1. And if I click that, that's going to show me the use full name pull request. And merging it as easy as just clicking this button. For sake of simplicity, I'm going to click this. I'm not going to explain the difference between merge and rebase. But as soon as you do that, it changes to merged, And if you go back to code, now you see my master branch has 3 commits. And the 3rd commit is coming from this other contributor. So that's the demo. I hope it helped to clarify this ugly graphics. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is where to go from here. So I'm hoping to give you a few pointers in finding where you can find a project to work on. First thing that they always tell you is think about the applications you're already using. So some of the open source applications you're using, they're looking for your help. And the good thing about that is you're already using that application, so you're already familiar with what's happening. So try to search for those applications and see if you can find anyone that can use your help. And the second thing I'm going to recommend is, since you're at scale, you can just go to Expo and talk to people, see if they need help. They can use your help. Other than that, I'm going to mention a few challenges. For example, there's this Hacktoberfest challenge that happens on the month of October, and it's becoming more and more of a tradition. So during the month of October, if you submit a number of pull requests, they usually give you a free T-shirt. So, well, I'm not giving you the free T-shirt. You can get tons of free T-shirts during the month of October. There's also this challenge called 24 pull requests that runs from December 1st to December 24th. It expects you to submit 1 pull request for each day, which I found really hard, so I'm not doing it. But if you're into that, you can go to that. And the last thing I'm going to say, I'm running this thing called Pull Request Club, which gives you random assignments for a month. So every month you get a random code repository, and you're expected to submit 1 pull request to that random code repository. If you find a repository that you're interested in, go through its issue tracker, look for tags that looks like these. Those are usually pointed towards beginners and usually welcoming. If I remember correctly, on services like GitHub, you can also search for issues without specifying a certain repository. So for example, you can look for Perl projects that has issues with these tags. So that can be useful too. Once you find the repository, you can get in touch with them through issue tracker by opening an issue saying like, hey, I want to help. Do you need any help? What do you need help with? Or you can, if they're using IRC or Slack, you can go ping them there. Some of the projects are using mailing lists. Be careful, there might be multiple mailing lists. I am highly going to recommend the URL below for the full entry, but just to give you a quick summary of PR etiquette, always be polite, and I would add, always be patient. Follow repos convention. We talked about this. If they call themselves free software, call them free software. If they're using tabs, use tabs. Keep changes small means if you want to change 2 things at once, maybe consider submitting 2 separate pull requests. And that's where branches come really handy. So you can build 2 feature branches for 2 separate things and then submit 2 pull requests, 1 for each branch. And do the whole change means if you're changing a feature, make sure to update its documentation, make sure to update its tests as well. Lastly, I should have taken this out before, but I'm going to recommend some books here. First, the Forge Your Future with Open Source, written by VM Bresser. This is a great book that will take you from 0 to 100. It tells you everything you need to know about the open source, the licenses, how you find a project, how you should communicate with projects. And the other book I'm going to recommend is How Open Source Ate Software by Gordon Half. And this is going to tell you how open source has become what it is today. It's a great book and telling you the history of the book, of the open source world.